Why can't you stop scrolling? Even when you decide to stop, it's not a willpower problem. Something in the brain has changed. Researchers have found specific shifts in how the brain processes reward, attention, and control. These changes happen faster than most people expect. Understanding exactly what changes and how those changes drive behavior reveals something important about the brain's ability to adapt and why that same adaptability is also the path back. Why does the next video start playing before the last one ends? Every scroll delivers something new, a different video, a new idea, a small surprise. That unpredictability is the mechanism. Here's the first shift. Dopamine is often described as the brain's pleasure chemical, but that's not quite right. Dopamine's primary role is motivation. It drives the urge to seek, and the brain responds more strongly to unpredictable rewards than predictable ones. Research shows something important. When an outcome is certain, the dopamine response is modest. When the outcome is uncertain, when a reward might appear, dopamine activity increases significantly. The brain is not reacting to the reward. It is anticipating the possibility of one. Scrolling is built on that principle. Each swipe might deliver something interesting, or it might not. That uncertainty keeps the dopamine system active, and an active dopamine system drives continued behavior. The scroll is not random browsing. It is a reward loop, one the brain is built to follow. But what happens when that loop runs for hours every day? The brain adapts to its environment. That is one of its most fundamental properties. When exposed to high levels of dopamine stimulation repeatedly, the brain adjusts. It reduces its own sensitivity in response. Dopamine receptors downregulate. The brain produces less dopamine in response to the same stimulation. This is the same adaptive mechanism seen in other high-stimulation behaviors. The brain is trying to maintain balance. The result is a lower baseline. Activities that were once interesting, reading, a conversation, a walk outside, produce less dopamine response than they did before. Not because those activities changed, but because the brain's sensitivity to normal stimulation has dropped. So when scrolling stops, the brain is not returning to neutral. It is dropping below its adjusted threshold. Everything feels slower, less engaging, harder to start, more stimulation, less sensitivity. The gap between scrolling and everything else widens over time. That's why stopping feels harder than it should. If someone wants to stop scrolling, why doesn't stopping feel natural? The decision to stop is processed in the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for impulse regulation, planning, and executive control. This is the part of the brain that says, enough. But the prefrontal cortex does not operate in isolation. It competes with the brain's reward-seeking systems, and under conditions of high, repeated stimulation, that competition shifts. The reward system becomes more dominant. The prefrontal cortex becomes less effective at overriding it. Research using functional brain imaging has shown that heavy screen users show reduced activity in prefrontal regions, associated with behavioral control and higher reactivity in reward-related regions. The same pattern seen in other impulse control difficulties. The stop signal is still there. It just arrives late, or quietly, or gets overridden before the behavior changes. It is not that the decision to stop never happens. It is that the signal gets delayed long enough for the next piece of content to arrive first. There is a fourth change, one that makes all the others harder to reverse. Sustained attention, the ability to stay focused on one thing, is a trainable capacity. The brain strengthens the circuits it uses and weakens the ones it doesn't. Scrolling trains, switching, not sustaining. Each swipe resets focus. The brain learns to expect a new input every few seconds. When no new input arrives, it generates the urge to find one. Not as a conscious decision, but as an automatic response, the same way the brain generates hunger when blood sugar drops. Over time, the threshold for boredom drops. Tasks that require sustained attention, deep reading, problem solving, extended conversation feel more effortful than they used to. Not because they are harder, but because the brain has been trained away from them. This is neuroplasticity, working in reverse. The same mechanism that allows the brain to learn new skills is being applied to a pattern that fragments attention rather than builds it. The brain has learned to expect the next input, even when the person holding the phone would rather put it down. These four changes do not operate independently. They form a system. The dopamine loop drives seeking behavior. The lowered baseline makes everything else feel flat. The weakened stop signal delays, disengagement, and fragmented attention make sustained focus feel unnatural. Together, they explain why scrolling does not feel like a choice in the moment. The brain is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what brains do, adapting to the environment it is given. Repeated high-stimulation inputs restructure the reward system, the attention system, and the control system simultaneously. The same neuroplasticity that allows humans to master a language, an instrument, or a complex skill is at work here. It does not distinguish between useful adaptations and harmful ones. It responds to patterns. This also explains why simply deciding to stop is often ineffective. The decision is being made by a prefrontal cortex competing against a well-trained reward system. Willpower is not the issue. The architecture has changed. The brain is not broken. It learned. When stimulation drops, when the pattern of constant input slows, the brain begins recalibrating. Dopamine sensitivity recovers. Attention circuits strengthen with use. The prefrontal cortex regains its footing. This does not require eliminating screens. It requires changing the pattern enough that the brain has time to adapt in the other direction. The same mechanism that drove the problem is also the path out of it. Because the brain does not stay fixed. It responds to whatever it repeatedly experiences. So why can't you stop scrolling? Because your brain learned not to. And what the brain learns, it can also unlearn.